Hello, everybody. I am here. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and we are here in the critical thinking classroom where we are generally talking about topics that are around high school age. So some of the language you're probably familiar with at high school age, but if you're a little bit younger, maybe some of the language is above your thinking, but that's okay. Any age can join any one of these classrooms, even the early bird classroom. Really, obviously, it doesn't matter. You're in your own home. It's not like somebody like, hey, you don't belong here. But more than that, there's so many of the topics that we talk about that crossover. I talked about book sales that I went to, and I'm not going to talk about that today because I don't have any really any books for you guys. I picked up a couple books for me about the popes. Thought I had one on the saints, but I didn't. Actually, they didn't have one there. I don't have a book on the saints. I'm surprised. I have pamphlets and flyers and this and that, but I don't actually have a whole collection of a book on the saints. I'm a little bit disappointed about that. I thought that I did, and I don't know what happened to it. I might have given it away. I'm not sure. I think it's around here somewhere. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's get started with what we are talking about today. And we have been talking about learned helplessness, right? Learned helplessness, and then how Seligman and Christopher Peterson had turned that concept of learned helplessness into a concept of learned optimism. Now, let me tell you something about the idea of, which you likely can figure out on your own, but as a scientist, we use the word learned on purpose. That's a purposeful word that we're using, which meant that we had to learn it. All right, that sounds silly, but think about it. A lot of times we talk about nature versus nurture. Is this something that is part of my biology? Or is this something that I got through time, through my environment? I was going to use the word acquired. I acquired because of my environment. Is it something that I got in my environment? So that would be learned. It's not part of my biology. It's not something I instinctually do, like blink my eyes, right? Or get afraid of falling, for example. Those are kind of natural responses. Some of them we learn to a certain extent, but some of them we never had to learn. Fear of loud noises, right? Startle reflex. We didn't have to learn that. So there are some things that are written in our DNA, that are part of our biology. So when we talk about things that are learned, we are not fearful and helpless by nature. We are not fearless or fearful. We are not fearful and helpless by nature. We know that. We can talk about it in the spiritual classroom. We talk about it, or we could talk about it in the spiritual classroom, but that's what scripture says to us, that he did not make us with a spirit of fear. So we are not fearful by nature. We get startled, right? So, and that's natural, right? Because we have to be aware that something is going on that might be dangerous for us. So yes, we might get startled naturally, but to have a spirit of fear, to be running around afraid, that's learned. That's what we're saying here. So we learned concepts of giving up and feeling helpless. Those concepts are learned. All right. We learn those concepts just like we learn concepts of feeling optimistic, of being optimistic. All right. So that's why we're taking some time to talk about the foundation. Some of it has to do with self-esteem, right? But some of it has to do with ideas that we have learned over time because what? Because every time we try, we don't get the rewards we expect. So we try and we try and we try, and then we eventually give up, right? Is that the kind of person that you are. So learning helplessness, because we try and we try and we try and then we give up. So we can say, well, that's the kind of person that I am. I'm a person who's a pessimist and I'm a person who gives up, right? You might say that. But the fact is that that is a learned process. If you are a pessimist, what we know is that's learned. It's learned because you feel that you don't have any control. So let's take a look at that again. Those two statements there, we'll just quick take a look at them. So people who are pessimistic, we'll start with pessimistic, have a who view negative or bad events, they view negative or bad events as their own fault, that they are going to happen again because they're stable, and that they happen in all kinds of different situations, global. Optimistic people believe that when there's a bad event that occurs, that it is due to something outside of myself, the environment, right? I got in a car accident because the roads were icy, right? I flunked that test because I stayed out late last night, right? Not because I'm dumb, something internal to me, but because I stayed out late last night. I didn't pay my bill because I lost my job, right? So it's not because I'm lazy, I'm forgetful, I never do I'm not irresponsible, but it's because I lost my job. That's something outside of me. An optimistic perspective says it's not going to happen again, right? I'm not losing a job every single day. I might be out of a job for a while, but I'm not going to be out of a job forever. There's all kinds of jobs available, and it's limited to one aspect of my life. I am always on time for other things, for example. All right? So again, think about, how do you explain when something bad happens to you? And as we've said, what you want to be listening to is your self-talk. So that's what we've been talking about in Allie's book, right? Hyperbole and a Half. Oh, I hate when that happens because it might knock over my vase, but it did not. Which I should get rid of anyway, because all of these petals are all over here. Oh, and there was the other vase. Oh my goodness gracious, what's going on here? Okay, I have to pick that vase up because that vase had water in it. I can't believe it didn't break though. So, all right. Oh, what just happened? Okay, I will be back in just a minute because I have to pick that vase up. I have to wipe that water up. Hold on. I'll let you keep this up there. Problem solved. See that? Now, I got my flowers back, right? They're a little worse for the wear. But I also got, down to the bottom. Must be. But I also got my chalk back too, to write on those little chalkboards, right? You know, when you feel helpless, you would have made that mess and we would have stopped, right? When a helpless person would have just stopped, that could take them, right, a minute to be able to regroup, which means we're done for the day. And it's not like I haven't done that. I've gotten frustrated before about neighbors interfering with my internet, and then dropped frames, which, by the way, I have almost no interference anymore and almost no neighbors anymore. So, hey, how about that? Anyway, and I said, I said, you know what? I'm done. On a spiritual classroom, it kept coming through my spiritual classroom. I didn't feel like they wanted me to say things that were spiritual things. And so frames kept dropping. I kept, getting the wheel of death. And I got frustrated and I said, you know what? I'm done. And so you can get one of my spiritual classrooms where I basically am complaining about not having the internet connection and about, people interfering with my internet connection. And I said, I'm done. But small things like that can't take us out, right? And also, I don't want to create a larger problem either. A larger problem would have been if I left that water sitting there and didn't take care of the problem right away, right? Then it would have created a larger problem for me. Things down there would have gotten wet. My chalk would have gotten wet and I wouldn't have been able to use it anymore. So it would create problems if you don't take care of the problem right away. Now, from Allie, if you remember from Allie, which is the book that I went to go get when the catastrophe happened, and I still have a mess there because I didn't sweep it up. When we were talking about Allie, we were talking about how she was unable to do anything, right? That she was just so depressed she couldn't do anything. Maybe I'll go outside today. Nope, I hate myself too much, right? So this person here is a person that is gonna leave and even says something about not showering, right? So what's the point? You're not even showering, right? So why would I even... I'm trying to find out where it says that. Yeah, and crawling very sadly across the floor, right? The self-loathing and shame had ceased to be even slightly productive, but it was too late to go back at that point. So I just kept going. I followed myself around like a bully, narrating my thoughts and actions with a constant stream of abuse. So remember that? So that was her self-talk and how she... Here it is, right? So I had been showering. It wasn't like I'd been showering regularly, and sitting on a pile of clothes isn't necessarily uncomfortable. But even if it was, I couldn't feel anything through the self-hatred anymore. So it didn't matter, just like everything else. So here you could see that she can't get anything done either, right? So that is a learned helplessness. There's a reason why Allie feels that way. And it's not because she was born feeling that way. Even though Allie doesn't know or is having a hard time figuring it out, but a much better time figuring it out because she's writing about these things in such a humorous way, right? So going through and having a difficult time figuring these things out, so much so that she, like she said, leaves everything there on the couch. And we were talking about on Thursday about how she got out of it, right? So at the end of episode number 2, or depression number 1, episode number 1, I'm sorry, depression number 1, at the end of it, she said that she got out of it by not caring. That's what I was looking, because she went to the movies, right? I was thinking, did she rent the movie? Is that how? No, but she lost all of her emotions, right? So she gave up all of her feelings, and that's the end of her depression part 1. How she ends her depression part 1, right? So we get a good idea of what this self-talk is all about. Allie's got it going on all the time, right? So we have a really good idea of what is self-talk. And then her solution after depression part 1 was to what? Her solution was to turn off all of her feelings, to not feel. That's apathy. So when you hear the word apathy, and Allie uses it kind of a lot, not too much, but she uses it a few times. Apathy is no feelings at all. You don't care one way or the other. It really does not matter to you. And I'm sure explaining this to people, you already get it, right? I don't have to go into a whole lot of detail about what apathy is. Some of you really already get it pretty well. So now, as we go into depression part 2, so her solution for part 1 is to give up all of her feelings, right? And here, who knows? Maybe I'll touch a spider later, right? So rented all those horror movies, all those Skittles. I don't care. Doesn't even matter to me. It's not like I was showering, right? Now, in depression part 2, I'm not going to read it all to you, but she loses her motivation for her play. The way she used to play when she was young no longer entertains her anymore. And that's sad. It is very sad. It's sad for every one of us. Every one of us. When I was a little girl and I no longer could play Barbies any longer, right? And that was very sad for me. And I realized actually it was way sadder than I thought, because my neighbor had the Barbies and I couldn't play with her anymore. Way sadder than I thought. But that's sad, right? So giving up that childhood fun, that childhood place that you go where all, and a lot of people today don't give it up, right? That's why we've got people who would rather live in Disneyland than any place else, because people don't want to give up their fantasy. Why? Because it's sad. It's sad. It's sad for everybody. And no matter how old you are, if I had a fantasy as an adult to be with somebody and I had to give that up, that would make me very sad, right? So it doesn't matter. Any fantasy that we have to give up is very hard and it makes us sad. You know, one of the things that we know in psychology is that wise people are not necessarily happy people, and likely they are not happy people. Not that they're depressed, but they're just not over the charts happy. Why? Because they have a great understanding of what is really, really going on. And that saddens people, right? It is hard. If you're a wise person, you realize that you have to give up some of those childhood fantasies. You can't think like, Fred Flintstone. It came to mind. But you can't, right? You can't think like whatever cartoon character, a superhero, right? It's so interesting to me because, like I said, I know Allie, and she says she's Batman, and I also say she is Batman. So there is this constant battle between trying to give up a fantasy and believing in your superhero kinds of skills in a way. I mean, that to me, when I read that here, her thinking that she's Batman, I found that to be so refreshing for me. Like I was like, you did some wonderful things. You wrote this book without anybody knowing who you were. I didn't. I didn't until I reread it. I told you. I didn't until I reread it. This was 2013 I got it. Likely I got it 2013. I just reread it and just figured out who Allie is, right? So, and that, that discovery is sad too, a little bit. Because then I find out some of the sadness and depression that Allie went through. That makes me so sad. And the only thing that helps me deal with that kind of sadness, the same kind of sadness I'm talking about when you give up a fantasy, for example, it is a sadness. There is a small death there. There is a small death there. But in this conversation, what might a small death give to you? Those small deaths, what might they give to you? Experiences for building true grit, right? So when we have to give up the fantasies that we have of young people, or for me, it was the hurtfulness of knowing that Allie was going through that kind of depression, finding it out years later, right? And how hurt that makes me, right? But what, and that it does, and there's a death there. There's like I'm talking about, there is like a feeling of a death there. The person that I thought that she was is different, and different in a way that scares me, right? Because there was real depression. You could read it. Oh my gosh, there was real depression there. And so there's a little death there of the person that I thought that I knew that I didn't know, right? And even after reading all this in 2013, I still didn't know. So there's that little death there, right? And the fact that, what if I had known who she was in 2013? Could I have said things? Could I have done things? Has she gone through more depression like this? I'm quite sure she has. I'm quite sure she has. And if I had known this was her in 2013, would I have said something different in the last 10 years to her? Right? Those are little deaths that we have, but they are also, we can choose to not die that death and hold on to it and hold on to the fantasy, right? And then we ignore things like depression in people that we love, and our spouses, and our children, and our parents, and our mothers, and our fathers, and our sisters, and our brothers. We don't recognize it. And even in our spiritual classroom, we talk a little bit more about this, but what was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn was I spent all this time educating myself to prevent people that I love from being hurt, feeling things like depression, from going through things like anger or crises or whatever, right? In this day and age, I was educated to do that. And now what could I do? I could ignore the fact that my family is going through the same things that everybody goes through, despite all of my education, and not face it. And then what help would I be? What help was I to Allie, not knowing that this was Allie? I mean, all things in their own time, right? All things in their own time. But what help could I be if I didn't know? So, do you stick with your fantasy and choose to not know? And I think about that in my philosophical classroom and what we have chosen to not know as far as is concerned, right? And what we've chosen to ignore as far as what science has been doing. And there are ways to do this that are productive, right? There are going to be ways to do this that are productive. I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday about, you know, January 6th and the insurrection. He says, why are we still talking about it? I can't believe they're still talking about it. Well, they're still talking about it because this is an ongoing problem with our democracy and whether or not we have people who are standing up as they really want to do for democracy and for what is right, and then doing it in a way that's productive, right? So, how productive would it be for me to stay in a fantasy and not what? As a teacher, believe that my students struggle. As a wife, believe that my husband has pains, right? As a mother, believe that my children aren't perfect. As a mother, believe I'm not perfect, right? So what happens when we don't go to those truths? And Allie does. And Allie absolutely does. So let's look at how she does that. I said I'm not going to go and read all of this. But this is, right, certain deaths that she dies to herself. And in the end, because we've read it, right, where she decides to go through it, right? So here she is in the darkness, okay? Oh, are you trying to get away? Go see what's over there. So she is not believing the fantasy. She's leaving her fantasy is what she's doing. The courage that she is showing and leaving, it's literally giving me goosebumps. The courage that she shows in these pictures, that we can see in these pictures, are just incredible, right? Surprise, it's nothing, but what's in the hole? She's looking to figure out, we know, right? She's trying to figure it out. She's not believing the fantasy. She's not going to live in Disneyland anymore. She's going to figure out what the hell is wrong with her. That's what she's doing. He. What is it? He. Laughing at her. What's in there? Is it nothing? She's looking for something. Why am I feeling this way? I'm gonna find out. Why am I feeling this way? I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna find out. See if it's over there. See if it's down that hole. What's in there? What is it? What's in there? Is it nothing? And then she talks about all the people who want to help, right? And how do they help? By saying positive things, by being positive. What else would you do? I don't know what else you would do. Allie says, tell me that my fish are dead. What's wrong? My fish are dead. Don't worry. I'll help you find them. Are there any clues where they went? So this is what Allie is seeing, right? That nobody's paying attention to her real truth. That is such bravery, and it's such wisdom. It's such bravery and it's such wisdom that she is showing, because she's looking for something and she knows it can only be found in truth. Stop lying to me. Stop lying to me. It doesn't make me feel good. Just like when we were talking about self-esteem. Stop lying to me. Stop telling me that my logo set that I made is as good as my older brother's when it's not. And Allie shows tremendous courage in going through the darkness and what she doesn't know and has every reason to be afraid of, because she doesn't know what it is. We all have a fear of uncertainty. We have a fear of things being uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty in my life right now. So there are a lot of fears that we have, and pretending that they're not there is never going to work. Never. And that's where do we get the grit from? And taking on the challenge. And taking on the challenge. How, in the face of a lot of these stresses, can I remain somewhat stable, somewhat confident? Is because I've learned grit by learning the lessons, learning those important lessons all along the way that I really needed to learn, those little steps, going through the darkness, just like Allie is. And Allie's doing it in big chunks is what she's doing. But here, look at this. And I've read this before, but this is again for the self-talk and to demonstrate the courage and the consequences of doing this kind of hard work. All right. So positivity, yay, hope and joy, beauty and love. Are you taunting me? Is this some weird game where you name all the things I can't do? Isn't that exactly what happens? Isn't that exactly what we experience when we are feeling things like depression? Stop shooting your positivity at me. But in the end, cut to the chase, what is Allie doing here other than just shooting you big bombs of cotton candy positivity? All wrapped up in negativity. But look at the funny pictures. You can't help but see that this is negativity all cloaked in positivity. Absolutely. Okay. So there's the fish, right? So everyone's trying to be positive. Fish are always deadest before the dawn. So people are trying to give you philosophical advice, all kinds of advice, right? That's not working, right? So what happens? So she goes through this weird whatever thought process, right? Of thinking all kinds of things and extremely depressed, thinking about Soon afterwards, I discovered that there's no tactful or comfortable way to inform other people that you might be suicidal. And there's definitely no way to ask for help casually. Knock, knock joke. Knock, knock. Who's there? And then suicide. I want to be dead. Actually, this isn't a knock, knock joke. Wait. I have something to tell you. Surprise, rhymes. No, too casual also might be interpreted as a joke. All right, so she tries to tell us in a knock-knock joke. Here. Yell or run away. Hey, I might do something bad to myself. And then run away. Pros. You don't have to be there for the fallout, but the cons are it's confusing and alarming, right? Might not get your message across. Write on face and wait for someone to notice. Maybe, but face probably not big enough. Okay, so write it on your face, right? Please help. I have lost control of my life. Absolutely. Look at how Allie hit it on the head again. I didn't want it to be a big deal. However, it's an alarming subject. Trying to be nonchalant about it makes it weird for everyone. So she goes through, right, all of her, now she gets her first feeling back. What's her first feeling? Hate. Of course it is. Of course it is. It is for everybody. It is for everybody. Exactly. I hate sun. I hate purple. I hate me. There's a basket of hate, right? So that's her first feeling all the time, right? But I stay strong. It gets better, right? And then, thankfully, I rediscovered crying just before I got sick of hating things. I call this emotion crying and not sadness because that's all it really was. Just crying for the sake of crying. My brain had partially learned how to be sad again, but it took the feeling out for a joyful ride before it had learned how to use the brakes or steer. So sadness is taking a little ride in the car of crying as if because it doesn't know how to steer yet, right? Doesn't know how to command the control of the car yet. So sadness is not on board. So crying came on before hate is what Allie is saying. Oh my gosh. Does this not make sense? So even if you say I feel nothing and have it absolutely be true, isn't there still times where you would be crying and not know why? And why wouldn't you know why? You wouldn't know why because you feel nothing. So why are you crying? Right? Right? Is Allie not hitting the nail right on the head here? Absolutely. So there's Allie. Hey there, is that Juice? Yeah. Why are you crying? I don't know. It's just something that's happening. At some point during this phase, I was crying pointlessly on the kitchen floor. As was common practice during bouts of floor crying, I was staring straight ahead at nothing in particular and feeling sort of weird about myself. Then, through the film of tears and nothingness, I spotted a tiny shriveled piece of corn under the refrigerator. I don't claim to know why this happened, but when I saw the piece of corn, something snapped inside of me, and then that thing twisted through a few permutations of logic that I don't understand and produced the most confusing bout of uncontrollable, debilitating laughter that I have ever experienced. So look at that picture there. I had absolutely no idea what was going on. Why did the corn cause this to happen? And so now Allie's going to process it like a computer. Eyes accidentally pass over the space underneath the refrigerator. Brain ignores the more relevant things it could be thinking about and instead focuses on tiny, unimportant piece of corn. Something I don't understand occurs. Corn plus floor. Corn plus floor equals clorn? How funny is Allie? Carry the F, multiply by how alone the corn is, perform a twisting maneuver, generate laughter. Laughter happens. It is a surprise. The element of surprise allows the laughter to circle back on itself, creates infinite laughter loop. There's Allie's scientific explanation. Stupid tiny piece of corn is now the funniest thing in universe. Nothing is funnier than dumb little piece of corn. My brain had apparently been storing every unfelt scrap of happiness from the last 19 months, and it had impulsively decided to unleash all of it at once in what would appear to be an act of vengeance. You want to be happy? Fine. I'll make you happy to death. That's really similar to that story about manna from heaven. You want something other than manna? You want meats? You want quail? I'll give you so much quail. You'll be spewing it from your eyes and you'll be so sick of quail. And they were. That's a story during Moses' time, because they were getting manna from heaven while they were in the desert. So Exodus is where you would find that story. But he literally gives them quail. Says, you want so much quail? You'll have quail coming out of your eyes and your ears and every orifice. That's what God did. Same kind of thing. You want to be happy? Fine. I'll make you happy to death. That piece of corn is the funniest thing I have ever seen, and I cannot explain to anyone why it's funny. I don't even know why. If someone asks me what was the exact moment where things started to feel slightly less shitty, instead of telling a nice, heartwarming story about the support of the people who loved and believed in me, I'm going to have to tell them about the piece of corn. And then I'm going to have to try to explain that no, really, it was funny. Because see, the way the corn was sitting on the floor, it was so alone, and it was just sitting there. And no matter how I explain it, I'll get the same confused look. So maybe I'll try to show them the piece of corn to see if they get it. They won't. Things will get even weirder. Look how tiny and shriveled it is. It was all by itself. Why aren't you laughing yet? Anyway, I wanted to end this on a hopeful note, positive note, but seeing as how my sense of hope and positivity is still shrouded in a thick layer of feeling like hope and positivity are BS, I'll say this. Nobody can guarantee that it's going to be okay, and I don't know if this will be comforting to anyone else. The possibility exists that there's a piece of corn on a floor somewhere that will make you just as confused about why you are laughing as you have ever been about why you are depressed. And even if everything still seems like hopeless BS, maybe it's just pointless BS or weird BS or possibly not even BS. Maybe everything isn't hopeless BS. I don't know, but when you're concerned that the miserable, boring wasteland in front of you might stretch all the way into forever, not knowing feels strangely hope-like. And so what does Allie do with her story on depression? She ends it just like all the other people were doing, right? Just like everybody else was doing for her. Positivity, hope and joy, beauty and love. Yay, hope. Are you taunting me? Is this some weird game where you name all the things I can't do? But how does she end that chapter? How does she end it? She ends it by doing it. By doing it. By giving hope. By showing beauty. By being positive. That's exactly what she does. It works. It works. But it has to work in its own kind of weird way. For you, you have to go through the dark to come out the other end, to come out the light. You have to go through. And being in a fantasy and staying in a fantasy is not going to accomplish that. You are not going to be able to go through. You have to do exactly what Allie did. And that's why the last conversation that we had was on coping, because this is just so skillfully written, so humorous, but so skillfully written that it just has to sort of give you, I don't know how you can't walk away from this with just the ultimate message that you can get through it if you go through it. And that's it. And the message there is this too. The realization, whatever you want to call it, I call it transformation sometimes, because if you're transforming yourself out of depression, it really is a transformation. I hope that it was a real good, long-lasting transformation for Allie, right? But that is what we are talking about. We are talking about a transformation, seeing things differently. I've also called it a paradigm shift as well, right? So trying to see things from a different perspective is what we're saying. And this happens in an instant, without explanation, without notification, without warning, that somehow bits and pieces of our life, of our story, of our memories, of whatever it is, come together at a moment in time and change our thinking, our way of thinking forever. A paradigm shift, and it happens in an instant. Sometimes it makes it so difficult for a psychologist to sometimes be able to give you the exact advice that you need, because Because likely what you need isn't advice. Likely what you need is a walk through, right? And that was at the end with her identity, right? And finding out her identity at the end, right? Hey, I specifically stated that you aren't allowed to go in there. So here's Allie making another trip through the unknown with the security person saying, hey, the voice in her head saying, don't do it. Don't do it. I'm going to find it. Where is it? I want to see it. She wants to see what is making. I don't have a signal right now, so I'm going to wait until I see that I've got a signal. Oh, I had such a good streaming signal, and now it is just horrible. Where are we on time? 11:23. I didn't get to some of the outcomes of optimism, and I think that even though this is skipping and you're getting a bad signal and it's not working very well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up the slides that have the information on it, and with those slides you'll be able to see it. Oh, there's the signal. The signal is back again. Okay, all right. So we're going to go ahead and continue on and look at and that's what this is about. So today is looking at the outcomes of optimism. So we talked about different optimistic and pessimistic explanatory styles, right? Is what we talked about, and gave examples for having an internal versus an external explanatory style, having a stable versus unstable explanatory style, and a global versus specific explanatory style. Okay, now these are, and you can see there are the words there down on this PowerPoint slide to the right there. So I/E is internal versus external. How do you explain events, right? Do you explain them as your fault or outside of your control? Stable versus unstable. Does it happen all the time? Or no, it happened in this one time. Global versus specific. Does it happen in all different situations? Global or no, just in this specific situation. And what they did in order to measure the different levels of your optimism or pessimism, there are a lot of different ways to measure it. Let me show you actually before I get in there. Yeah, that's what I wanted to see. Before I get into that one, let me show you. So I gave you this personal efficacy survey before when I was talking about mastering, right, and autonomy, and whether or not you believed that you had control over things. Well, that's what this personal efficacy survey is. So I've introduced it to you before, but here it is again. And this is, so you can go ahead, take the survey that is there on the right, and then you can score it using the information there that is on the left, calculating your score. So personal efficacy is a measure of personal control. How much control do we have? Here is another one, which was one of the very first surveys that was, and this one was done by oh my gosh, Julian Rotter. And this is, so he was the first one to theorize and talk about surveys for control. And what Seligman and Peterson did was use concepts from Julian Rotter on control and combine those concepts into their theory on explanatory style, optimistic or pessimistic explanatory style. Now, I know I'm using a lot of big words here. I have to give credit where credit is due and not make you think that, why are we looking at all these surveys and what about these names? I need to give you these names to give credit where credit is due. But the purpose here is to take a look at these surveys to see. You can use these surveys to see how much control you feel that you have, right? Or not that, because you might just tell me how much control you feel you have. But this is a scientific measure of control and how much control you feel you have. Here for this one, you see that the different colors are banded colors. So you've got darker green and then lighter green. And in each one of those banded colors, there are two statements that are being made there. So for the very first one, it says, many of the unhappy things in a person's life I can't see it because it's so small, are partly due to their bad luck. So many of the unhappy things in a person's life are partly due to their bad luck. Or people's misfortunes result from the mistakes they make. Which statement do you believe is more true? All right, so put an X there, or, whatever. You could do A and B. All right, so for number one, you could say, I believe A is true or B is true. And then you've got the light green band there for two more statements. Oh, it should be one of the. That should be the. I couldn't read that. One of the major reasons why we have wars is because people don't take enough interest in politics. Or there will always be wars no matter how hard people try to prevent them. Which one do you think is true? Do you think the first one is true, then mark A, or the second one is true, then mark B? All right, it doesn't matter which way you do it, all right? But then here is scoring. So if you chose, I don't want to put that on there too long, but that's how you score it. So depending on which one you chose there, all right, then you will either get a score of 1 or a score of 0, right? So you go to the score sheet. It will show you if you pick the first one on that first one, then that will give you 1 point, all right? Add up all of your scores, and on that next score sheet that I have there, it will tell you what higher scores mean, which I don't want to tell you right now because I don't want you to have a bias when you're taking that, right? Looking for higher scores. All right. Here, we've got what is called the cave technique. And what the cave technique is called, content analysis of verbal expressions. I think that's what it is. I know it's content analysis of verbal, expressions. So what is this? This is doing an analysis, exactly that. So analyzing, researchers are taking a look at verbal statements that people have made and then analyzing their verbal statements for positive statements or pessimism or optimism. So just exactly like if I were to take the statements that Allie made here. Hello, we have a very important message for our mom, Donna. Wait, could you just make her call us back? Thanks. All right, well, that's not exactly self-talk, right? But a verbal statement, I can judge that verbal statement, why are you crying? I can judge that verbal statement as being a positive statement or a negative statement. So that's what these researchers are doing. They are coding statements that were made in the newspaper, specifically for this, in the newspaper by baseball players after, or sports players, after they won or lost a game. To see what? To see if they blamed that win or loss on something due to themselves or something due to outside of themselves. That's the I versus the E score. How much is it internal statement? How much is it not my fault, something external to me? I couldn't throw the ball very well because it was damp from the weather. Not my fault, right? So they took statements that athletes made after they won or lost a game and then coded them for internal versus external. Does it sound more internal, like it's my fault? Does it sound more external, like it's something else, the weather's fault? Is it stable? Our team always stinks, right? Or is it unstable? We usually play a lot better than we played today. And then global, we can't get it together with the Oakland A's. We can't get it together with the, Boston Bruins. We can't get it together with the New York Yankees. We can't get it together with any team. Global versus specific. So those are the numbers there, and you can see that higher numbers indicate what? The attribution to the left. So if it's a higher number, it's going to be the I, the S, or the G. If it's a lower number, it's going to be the E, the U, or the S. Okay? All right. Take a look at that, and that's all that I have for you today. I'm going to blow it up again, and you can take a look at those scores now after I had already talked about them. So you can see the higher score there in the first one. The 7 is a higher score because these range from 1 to 7. That means that statement has a more internal attribution. My fault. All right? 3 is a middle of the road or lower score, so that tends to be unstable, the score on the right. 6 is a high score, tends to be global. That's a pessimistic statement. I've been putting too much pressure on myself. Now I'm relaxed. Internal, stable, not so stable, but global. All right? So my fault, and it's in general. On general, I put too much pressure on myself. Number 2, all 7s there. So that is a completely pessimistic statement. It's internal, it's stable, and it's global. The third statement, my timing was off for a second. Internal, it's my fault, but it's unstable and it's specific to that situation. And then the last statement there, they were playing great defense for a change. That is completely optimistic statement. So it is external, it is unstable, and it is specific. Okay, that's all that I have for you today. Now you know different ways to measure your feelings of control, which is optimism and pessimism. And we will pick up here tomorrow when we are back in the classroom. I am Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am the teacher. This is the Critical Thinking Classroom, and boy, have we had a lot to think about. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.